So the 6 ancestral secrets that I am trying to give to the world, Singer, are super simple, but I think they shouldn't be overlooked because of their simplicity, because they're really important. And I'll tell you the first one. It's actually the multivitamin in the sky. It's the sun. Like all these years we've been told, like, cover up from the sun, wear sunscreen, you could get melanoma. Well, I'm here to say that the sun nourishes us on so many different levels. So we have a clock in every one of the cells in our body. And if we don't get enough natural light, our body gets confused about what time of day it is. And this affects hormonal function. It affects digestion. It affects our sleep and the profundity and the restorative qualities of sleep. So we all need not less sun. We need more of it. And this was not something I understood at first. Again, I was an exercise professional, and then I got involved with the Weston A Foundation. They're big on nutrition. But my exploration didn't stop there, because I just have a continued posture of a learner. That's why when you said, do you know about this mastication gum? I was like, no, but trust me, I'm going to look it up because I'm very interested. So I started talking to Jack Cruz and Carrie Bennett and Thaddeus Owen and people in the quantum healing space. And they started saying to me, sunlight is more important than food. And I was like, what? Like, I'm preparing myself for a huge paradigm shift, but I understood why they said it, because our mitochondria, the tiny little engines in our cell that get energized by, various forms of energy, only get a third of their energy from food, and they get 2/3 from light. So why is everyone depressed? Why does everyone have SIBO and, gastric issues and all these things? I'm like, what is happening? I think it's because we don't have enough sunlight. So what I do and what I advocate for is sunrise before screen rise. I advocate for getting out and getting that early morning sun between 30 to 45 minutes after sun has risen. I'm not saying you have to be outside for 30 to 45 minutes. I'm saying get outside within that time frame. So this morning, sunrise was at 7 a.m. I got out at 7:30. And all you need is like 15 minutes. But that information goes through your eyes, through your skin, to the brain. And again, it starts this cascade of wonderful hormone functions. And then later in the day, when the UVA and UVB rays kick in and that part of the spectrum kicks in, that's also important. Again, that's a time when they say, oh, avoid the sun when the rays are harshest. No, that also has a function. So, and sunset as well. But I'm biggest on the sunrise because I think that's the piece that will help people sleep better. I know people that have lost weight just by getting that morning sun, and it's turned my life around. And I was a certified night owl. Like, if there was a night owl school, my name would have been on the wall as president of it, because I was staying up late all the time. My kids would go to bed and I would start kicking into high gear. Like, okay, let me answer some emails. Let me do some laundry. This is my time to shine. And I would just go on. And then I'd think, whoa, it's weird. Everyone else is sleeping and it's 2 a.m. and I feel fine. I didn't realize that the blue light from the screen was confusing my body about what time of day it was. So I'd get, of course, a second wind there. And then when I went to sleep, I would sleep quickly. I'd fall asleep quickly, but I would not get to that restorative deep sleep stage as easily as if I'd gone to bed earlier. Anyway, I've learned so much all about this. But the point I'm making is that the sun is exactly what Victor Dane called it in his book back in the 1930s or something. He said it's the great elixir vitae. Like, it is a healer of healers. It's amazing. And we've forgotten about it because it's kind of gotten buried. And we just think, well, we need vitamin D. Let me take some vitamin D supplement. The synthetic thing is not the same as the real thing. And letting that sun and then the skin synthesize the vitamin D, that's a whole other story.
Now, I've recognized the power of sunlight exposure in my own life. I will always try to get out there, not always right after sunrise, but at least mid-morning, something to where just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes in my backyard, something. And it makes me feel better. It gives me energy. I enjoy doing it. It's warm. It makes me feel good. When I try to talk to people about it, they go, oh, skin cancer. You're going to get skin cancer. So what is your answer when people bring that up as an objection?
Oh, I have so many things to say. I don't know where to start, but I'll start with this. So indigenous people groups that Dr. Weston A. studied in the 1930s, he traveled the world to find the healthiest people. This is shorthand for all this information that I know about him. But anyway, he was looking to see, what are these people doing? How are they living? What are they eating? Of course, they all had different diets, from the people in Alaska who were eating like whale blubber and seal oil, to the people in Switzerland who were having cheese and milk and dairy products, to the Maasai who were having meat and milk and blood. So it was all different. But he still noted some things in common, and he wrote a book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. But I'm bringing all this up to say, the one thing that Dr. Price noted, but didn't make a big deal of because he was a dentist, he was focused on the teeth and the food, was that the people were naked primarily. They weren't really wearing much clothing unless they went into town, and they would toss a couple of things on. And this was in the 1930s. So these people were not getting skin cancer. Why? Because they had more sun, not less, and because their diet was of benefit to providing the skin what it needed to make the melanin that's protective on the skin. So I suggest two things: that we look for more sun, not less, because it will actually help protect. When you get the early morning sun, there's no UVA or UVB in the spectrum. So it actually has a protective element to it. It's kind of building up your solar callus. So that will help you not burn and not get melanoma. But the other thing is you have to pay attention to diet. So you need to eat more real foods and more foods that are less processed. So, for example, I recommend avoiding what we call seed oils. They used to be called vegetable oils, but there's not really many vegetables from which these things are extracted. So the indigenous people were generally using the fat from the animal to cook things in. So it would be lard from the pig, or tallow from the cow, or coconut oil, like things that were easy to get the fat from, as opposed to canola oil, which is like fat that they pull out of a rapeseed that actually goes rancid really quickly. So they have to deodorize it and colorize it to put it on the shelf and sell it to you at a cheap price. So I say if it has a long shelf life, it'll probably shorten yours. So anyway, I digress. But the main thing is eat more real food and get more sun. And I will tell you one quote I learned from Elizabeth Plourde, who I had the Wise Traditions podcast. I had her on the podcast asking, like, is it the sun to blame, or is it the sunscreen? Like, what's going on with our sickness right now and the incidence of cancer? And she said there was a study of sailors on a ship, and I forget when this was conducted, and if I get a chance to look it up, I'll send it to you later. But she said it was actually the sailors who had more time inside the cabins that got the skin cancer, as opposed to the ones that were mostly outside on the deck of the ship. So it's, again, the opposite of what we've heard. And I think I'm grateful that you have this podcast, this Decidedly podcast, because people need to learn to make decisions not based on the things that have been repeated to them over time, but on other measures, which we can get to in a bit. But I've been thinking about, how do I make my decisions? And I've learned to not always heed the loudest voice and look inside a little bit more.
Yeah. And having a principled framework like you do to say, hey, I'm going to place a lot of credence in the time-tested ancestral methods. That helps you filter out a lot of nonsense, because if some, 9 out of 10 doctors come out and say skin cancer is caused by too much sun exposure, it goes, okay, well, I may not be convinced just because there's a consensus in the medical community right now. Let me look at some other data points. And I find that is something that I'm generally following, is to go, okay, let's look at the world history before I commit to, a new belief that obesity is caused by an Ozempic deficiency. Now we've solved the problem. I think, though, when it comes to sun exposure, it seems like the clear thing to avoid is burning, right? We don't want to go get a sunburn.
That's right. That's right. So we have to be wise. I'll never forget my friend, Lisa, who went to Kenya one time, and she was working there with some translation or literacy group and helping a tribal group come up with a written language. And she said, my sister came to visit, and my dad and I were there, and the heat was so strong and the sun was so hot. And we looked around and noticed that all the Maasai were in the shade and the Mahdi people that she was working with. And so, in other words, they were standing out in the blazing sun, where the indigenous people knew, okay, the sun is really hot right now. We're going to get in the shade. You can wear linen. There are things you can do to cover up naturally, because the other thing I think people need to pay attention to is how the puzzle pieces don't fit. Just like you were saying about the Ozempic, that's not necessarily the reason people are overweight is because they don't have Ozempic. The reason people are getting cancer is not because they didn't have sunscreen, because they never used to have sunscreen.
Yeah.
And sunscreen, this is what gets me about that. It's being banned in certain places in the world because it's harming the marine life. So we have to think, if it's harming the marine life, what is it doing to us? And I know we're bigger than the little plankton and the coral life and all that, but what is it doing to us? And it actually does have hormone disrupting chemicals that are wreaking havoc with us on a hormonal level. There's all kinds of stuff in that thing. So that's one reason that I avoid it. I think you're right. I have the framework of ancestral traditions that have stood the test of time. And also I have my faith framework. So I kind of submit to higher powers than what the government or the other people are telling me, especially the people who have a monetary interest in mind. And they're not interested in my health. They want me to buy their products a lot of times.
Yes.
So I am going to be a little bit wary about that.
Yeah, a little bit skeptical when somebody's making money off you taking their advice.